The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Once again, I want to find out what's happening with the replacement for our fighter jets. I think myself and all Canadians would like to have tangible details as to what is happening with the National Fighter Procurement Secretariat. And I think that what Canadians want are real details. We've heard in the media that Public Works is thinking of procuring an alternative to an F-35 to replace our CF-18s. I think the government has finally realized that there have been delays and major problems with the production of this aircraft, and that they may have to act now to avoid having an aging fleet with no replacement in sight. It's becoming more and more critical. For months and even years, it has been repeated that the government should have a plan B because its plan A seems not to hold water or have major problems. There are many participating countries who have withdrawn from the program, and other people have hit the pause button on their military procurement strategy. Other people have downgraded their orders, and the government pretended that all was well, and it said so openly and shamelessly in this House. For many months, the program has just been a farce, and when myself and my colleagues said this was a fiasco, this is what the minister answered. The member is unable to overcome the false statements, misinformation, misleading statements, and all the minister's statements on the F-35 turned out to be misinformation themselves. No one on the government side has ever apologized for having misled Canadians, for having misled this House for over 6 years now. The Conservatives have shown us point by point, step by step, what should not be done with regard to military procurement. They did not hold a call for tenders. They did not offer any formal guarantee of regional industrial and regional benefits. They had enormous cost overruns, and no one has yet assumed the responsibility for all this. The report tabled in December showcased the Conservatives' mismanagement, as had the Parliamentary Budget Officer, the Auditor General, and the NDP, who stood up for months and months to say so. However, not long ago, the National Defence Minister insisted that the total cost for the procurement of these aircraft would be $9 billion, and those who said the opposite were just inventing numbers. The Conservatives said that they didn't need a bidding process because the F-35 was the only possible replacement. Now we know that the costs of the F-35s have ballooned, and the Conservatives are stuck with this because they chose a sole source procurement. Their cost estimates were misleading and erroneous, so my question is simple. How many misinformation and misstatements are still in the minister's files? And also, Mr. Speaker, I would like to know whether the parliamentary secretary can give us real details about where we are at with the National Fighter Procurement Secretariat. Have they visited replacement plants? Have they discussed any alternatives? So if he could give us some concrete details, I'm sure all Canadians would be happy to learn them. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defence. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think that my honourable colleague knows full well that we would never mislead her. So everything I have to say tonight reflects the reality and the truth about what we were doing to replace our CF-18s for the Royal Canadian Air Force. And the story is already well known across the country. This replacement program it began in spring 2012 with the Auditor General's report.
A detailed report has been discussed in this place. It made a particular point about the full life cycle costs for the F-35, the need to calculate them properly, to make sure they were full life cycle costs, not a practice previously undertaken either for fighter jets or for other acquisitions in national defense. And we accepted that recommendation immediately. But we went beyond it and put together a 7-point plan that included action on that recommendation, but represented a restart of this program. A program that hadn't really begun because money had not been spent to buy a new aircraft to replace the CF-18s. And we were still some years away from an actual acquisition. So we froze funding on the acquisition. We established the 7-point plan. Et nous avons mis en...
And we set up the Secretariat in order to complete the government's work under this new plan. And it is not just any secretariat with any old employees. It is a blue ribbon panel led by a number of ministers and with a governance committee that is in the hands of well-renowned deputy ministers of the Public Service of Canada, and which resembles, to a certain extent, the secretariat that was appointed to replace our military ships.
Mr. Speaker, the work done already by the Secretariat has borne fruit. And I'm not going to give all the credit to public servants serving the Government of Canada now, because they're independent experts who are taking part in the work of this governance committee. Monsieur Denis Desautels, a former Auditor General of Canada, very distinguished. Dr. Kenneth Norrie, a former university president. This House knows very well what their work has achieved so far. In December, 2 ministers presented some of that work: the DND annual report on costs, the KPMG independent review of those costs, including forward-looking cost estimate frameworks, as well as an Industry Canada update on the industrial opportunities already accruing to Canada through the Joint Strike Fighter program, of which we remain a member. And lots of rhetoric, lots of misinformation has been spread about the costs. They now cover a 42-year life cycle. They still represent 65 F-35s. That's one of the candidate aircraft for acquisition. But the costs have, in effect, not changed. KPMG, DND confirmed the acquisition would be about $9 billion and the running cost about $1 billion a year. So what do we have to do next, Mr. Speaker? Obviously, under the 7 points, an options analysis still needs to be done. That is detailed work taking place in the Secretariat. We're going to leave to them the task of carrying that work forward. It's going to relate to a full range of choices and outline the advantages and disadvantages of each choice. We set aside the statement of requirements for the fighter aircraft that had been previously used. We're going to assess the impact of this options analysis
on that statement of requirements. Order.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would simply like to come back briefly to one point. When the government says that no money has been spent to date, I think we do have to point out that $700 billion have already been spent on the development of the Joint Strike Fighter, as in the F-35 model. I think it is important to say so because a lot of people have trouble. For that amount of money, a lot of people could buy a lot of groceries, people who are having trouble making ends meet. I'm a bit confused about what the parliamentary secretary said, because he talked about restart, whereas the Minister of Public Works has said that the work that had already been done would be used. The other options have been studied, the Super Hornet, the Rafale. So haven't there's been any concrete progress with regard to these replacement options? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. I would like to reassure my honourable colleague that these models have never been assessed rigorously, as we are doing so now under the leadership of this new committee, with the responsibilities coming from the government and accountability to this House. It is unprecedented for the procurement of a strike fighter in Canada's history. And yes, we do have to clarify. There are two programs. There is the development of a fighter jet program with our partners, on which we have spent several $100 million. But to actually replace our CF-18s, no money has been spent, no contract has been signed, and no options analysis has been done.
To ensure oversight, to ensure transparency, to ensure we get the right aircraft and value for taxpayers' money, the current Auditor General has already said that our government is taking steps in the right direction. And there have been other very positive comments on the success of these 7 points so far. We'll wait for the options analysis, we hope, later this year, and for the completion of the 7 points.
La motion portant que la Chambre